My screen?
Yeah, go ahead.
Everybody may need to mute other than John Mariana.
Developing the final image. I talk about that and I say 4 stages. I think back on how I developed my skills in photography, and that's why I put the 4 stages together. So I'll talk about those. Stage 1 being when we first get into photography, we learn how to capture an image. We learn very simple aspects about our camera. And in fact, a lot of people who first start out aren't even using aperture settings, ISO settings, or shutter speed settings. They're putting it on automatic. And that's stage 1. That's how you get into photography and you like what you're doing. Stage 2, you learn more things. You understand captures, meaning strong compositions, special light, backlight, side light. And I'll explain some of these more. And the use of shadows and highlights and even panoramas in stage 2. Stage 3, I say that we start to get really involved in how does an image have impact when it first hits the screen or in a competition, or even you have it on your wall and you want someone to look at it. And does it tell a story? Does it elicit an emotion? Stage 4, then from there, which I think is a big category today, I call artistic reality. Really, it's artistic composites of multiple images. And there's a lot of things happening now in the world everywhere. I'll show you some at the end of the program here. But I'll start with, so many times I hear, well, when we shot film, it was right out of the camera. And no, it wasn't. We would load the camera with film, do exposures, send it to a processor, and we would get prints and process film. However, the processor corrected white balance. They adjusted exposure, highlights, sharpness, saturation, because they wanted you to come back and they wanted you to be satisfied with the prints that you received. So there was a lot of work done for you by the processor. Well, digital, we have a sensor, we expose, and we make our own prints, and we have digital files. Well, what happened to that enhancement area? We use software. So when it's right out of the camera, it never really was right out of the camera. And today, if you want to look at it as it comes out of the camera, you'll realize you really need to do some additional things. And I'll talk about that and show that. And the newer cameras, right out of the camera, is amazing. There are features now in some of the newer cameras that are not only white balance and exposure, but highlight, sharpness, saturation, multiple image compression, all kinds of things. So which is better? Well, that's a personal thing. For me, I want the best pixels. So I don't want the camera doing a lot of things for me. I want to do that after the fact. Stage 1, basic, simple enhancements. Composition. You learn stronger compositions. I'll talk about those. How to get a good exposure, and you learn metering. When you go to stage 2, you really are looking at different types of light, and you find that backlight is really striking, and side light, which creates more 3-dimensional aspect to an image. Hard light, soft light, what is that? Geez. And then the color light. Oh, yes, there is color to light. Then you go from stage 2, going the wrong way, stage 2 into stage 3 and 4 for landscape, architecture, nature, all those things. and I say, you're making images with impact, not just taking pictures. You really, in stage 3 and 4, you are making images and they jump out. So you should stop taking pictures. And you say, what do you mean? Because when you are just taking pictures, your camera is first and your mind is second. You should start making images, because your mind dominates. As you're seeing a scene, you look at it, you think about the leading lines, you think about the color, you think about where the light is. So you are then making images, not just taking pictures. After the capture, stage 1, bring out the essence of an image. Rule of thirds, proper exposure, so that the highlights are not blown out. Shadows have some detail. Simple backgrounds. And you may even do some enhancements in stage 1 of just simple cloning, dodge, burn, darkening some areas, lightening some areas, cropping, simple enhancements. And a vignette, even in stage 1, you start to learn to do vignettes. And maybe in stage 1, as you progress, you start to understand how good it is to have shadows and highlights in specific areas of the image to draw the viewer's eye to where you want it to go. So for example, here's one of my stage 1, and now when I look at it, I think, why didn't you just tilt your camera a little bit? So rule of thirds. Well, if I had tilted the camera so that I fill the screen better, you see how there's so much empty space on the left and the right. But if I tilt this and bring out the highlights where I want the eye to go initially, which is not down at the stem in the bottom, I want it to be there, right on the wings and the body. So, and a little vignette, stage 1, you start to have the idea of how to make a presentation, and you look at it in relation to rule of thirds. And can you break rule of thirds? Absolutely. There are times when you have something right in the middle, which is not a problem, but just be aware of it. I was in Costa Rica. I assist Darcy Pino on workshops down there, and I didn't have a long enough lens, but I captured the bird as it was just landing, and I thought, okay, I could crop. Yep, I could crop in on this and then blur the background and create a whole different image based on how I captured it. So it had good pixels. And in a location down there, I could not maneuver around to get a different background, but I could make a selection of the bird, crop in, darken the background, and then highlight the head of the bird. So important. Where's the eye going first? It's going to go to the brightest area. So why not that be the most important part of the image? And look at the difference of that image on the right versus what I captured. Big difference. Just make simple backgrounds, bring the viewer's eye to where you want it to be, right there. I tried to maneuver around. Once you learn to do the compositions, you really want to stop looking at the main subject in the image and look around the background. So as I'm looking around the background, I see all these bright highlights. Can I move around somehow to remove those? Well, I couldn't. So capture it and then learned how to just darken the background and then bring light area to the face. So what a difference from that capture. So now I'm in stage 1, learning how to do some things to present my image. I do a workshop in Yosemite in June. And so here's the shot. Like if I looked at the histogram, I had detail in the highlights and I had detail in the shadows. So I just needed to learn how to bring those out because they were there. Here's something I talk about a lot. And it's amusing to me that I don't see this happen with even a lot of professional photographers, very well-known photographers. We read left to right. So our eye comes in from the left side of an image and moves across. So what happens in this image? As your eye comes in from the left, it falls off the bottom right of this image. So if I flip this horizontally, Now your eye is coming in from the left and you look up into the waterfall. And I'll bet you that you see the stones, the rocks now more, maybe even ignored them before, because here your eye jumped right over those rocks and then out the right-hand side. Now, reading left to right, major difference in how you see this image. Oh, and these rocks are something I call containment. They are a darker area that keeps the viewer's eye from falling off the right-hand side. Very important. So here, this is on the workshop I do in Yosemite. We spend a day in this area. It's a town far off in the eastern side. And so here's my first shot. And I often say to those who are in first stages, work the scene. Mean, okay, you got the first shot. Now look around. See that building? It's overlapping with the car. So just move a little bit to the right. So that building shifts. I mean, move to, yes, to the right. So that the building shifts a little bit to the right. Now you have the car by itself and you have more of a 3/4 view of the car, which is much more interesting. So then I think, okay, if I just move a little bit more, remove that one on the left-hand side and remove that. But there's a little bit of some buildings there. So I need to learn how to just remove those so that I have the car standing by itself. Get rid of the distracting, overlapping background. So you learn, starting now to learn to really present your images differently. One of the most famous areas in Yosemite is El Capitan. I mean, Half Dome, El Capitan also, but Half Dome. Well, work the scene. The tree is actually blocking Half Dome. So if I move to the right, I now have Half Dome presented, and the sun was shining through the upper part of the tree. So I got a little sunburst, which adds a lot to the scene. The trees and above, making sure now I'm learning composition in stage one. That's containment. That large limb up there is very important to push the eye back down the viewer, but back down into the image so that as their eye goes up, that's darker and it brings the eye down onto Half Dome. This is also in Yosemite, a church from the early 1900s, and I'm photographing it. And I realize, of course, that there's this bright area in the upper left. And I think, okay, I can crop that out. I can maneuver a little bit and bring out a little bit more of the shadow detail and the color saturation of the church. And this is how I can present it. So that upper area where the eye would go right up there immediately, it's not there anymore, and the church becomes the brightest area. How about just a foggy morning? Well, just look at the histogram. This exposure that you're seeing there is underexposed. I have a lot of room to the right-hand side of my histogram, which are the highlights. So I can open up quite a bit and take another exposure. A lot of room there. So open up. Didn't blow out the highlights. I look at the histogram. There is nothing touching the right-hand side of that histogram. So I know I have detail in all the highlights. Then I learned one of the neat things is to zoom the lens. Have it on a tripod and looking at this flower there, it's okay, nothing special, but all I did was just zoom the lens and it created something very different for me. What a neat presentation. Darken the little background, darken the background a little bit and highlight the flower area just a little bit. Down in Atlanta here at the Botanical Garden. And they had these lights. And they're very, very pretty. And I thought, oh, I'll just zoom. What a different presentation. Krog Street Tunnel also zoomed to present it very differently. And then brought out a little bit of the highlights. And now I'm learning dodge and burn and saturate a little bit. So I have a neat, interesting image. I crop it a little bit on the right-hand side, to fill the screen more, and then, whoop, go back, and then highlight it more. You see the right-hand side, just a little bit too much there. So if I crop that, bring out some saturation, and you have the zoom that I did with the lens. And this was a painting on the wall outside of the tunnel itself. And doing a zoom on that created a very artistic look to it. Easy things to do. Sepia tone, dodge, burn, contrast. Contrast brings three-dimensionality because you then are emphasizing darker areas and lighter areas. So at this point, I learned I have this shot, it was a panorama. I could turn it into a black and white as a sepia. Wow, that was a pretty neat thing to do. So stage one, very simple enhancements. Now you move to stage two. You have quality captures because you're thinking about rule of thirds. You may break it, but you're also thinking about it. Leading lines. Boy, how are you leading the viewer by the lines in the image to where you want their eye to rest? You work the scene that you're photographing. You look at saturation. And interesting for me is I only have one lens. It's a zoom lens. I don't have wide angle lens, telephoto lens, and so well, my one lens is now a 12 to 200 on a 4/3 Olympus. So I can cover lots of stuff. And I learned in stage two how to do some enhancements to bring out light, to blur the foreground, emphasize leading lines. And I came up with something I call the place to stand. And I'll show that to you and the difference that makes in an image. In fact, I discovered it in studying Albert Bierstadt paintings. When I was in my undergraduate, I thought I was going to be an arts major, and then I realized I needed to get a job when I got out of college, so I switched majors, but I kept all of my electives as studying art. And Albert Bierstadt was one of the ones that just really struck me. So let's look at this very seriously. This is Gates of the Valley, so it is Yosemite. And here's the horizon. And you've often heard, don't put the horizon in the middle of your image. Why? Because if you have it in the middle of the image, you're not emphasizing the upper portion of the image, nor are you emphasizing the lower portion of your image. They're equal, and it might not be as interesting. So you need to know which part of your image is more interesting. Here's a painting, lower horizon. These large areas on the left and right are what I call containments. Your eye coming in from the left. That large rock on the right-hand side really keeps you from going off the right-hand side of this image. A place to stand. Here's a place where you can be standing in there and looking at this scene. And I'll give you a little more emphasis on that shortly. And where's the brightest area? Right where he wants your eye to go, there in the center. And then I saw these two rocks. And I think, why did he paint those in there? I mean, they may have really been there or not, but he painted them in. Why? Why didn't he just paint the water flowing out? Well, here's why, I believe. If they are not there, your eye comes in, follows across the right, and then falls off the right lower corner. By having those rocks in there, it pushes your eye back in. They are containments, same as the large rock on the right-hand side. So, photographing this little green frog, he's only about an inch long down in Costa Rica. And again, I can't maneuver around to a background to get those highlights up, but I know I can do something about that. And I'm coming in from the left, I'm looking up into the under part of his face. So if I flip this horizontally, now when you come in from the left, you're looking right at his face. You're looking right at the eyes. And if I darken these areas, now remember, this is stage two, darken those, wow, that really brings it out. Special light coming from the side, sort of from the back, brings the eye right to the face of the frog. That's the center of attention. Rule of thirds. Wow. sort of fits in there. This one, he was climbing on the flower, and I thought, okay, good, good, good. And this works. In fact, the row of thirds really fills that nicely. And the brightest area is where I want your eye to go. And I have the eye coming in from the left and going up and then seeing the bright area against the dark background. I'm in Assisi. I have been teaching a workshop in central Italy, not during the pandemic. I haven't been at earlier years. And so I'm at Assisi and I think, wow, look at that sky coming in, those leading lines. That's wonderful. So I was waiting for those lines to be right in place for the large dome area there. And I got down low, almost laying on the ground so that I would foreshorten the foreground and emphasize the upper area. And then the leading lines, those lines of the architecture coming in, pointing right down. And then the leading lines in the sky were just wonderful. So in stage two, I'm learning how leading lines bring the viewer right to where I want it to be. Up in Chicago, and I photographed this little lady. She was so neat. I just thought, oh, look at this. And also her dark area against the light background. Well, she saw me with the camera and she went across and stayed by the building on the left. Then she heard the train coming and she stood out and I got the shot. I want to say here's dark against light, which makes her three-dimensional. All the leading lines coming into her. And this is a containment on the left and it's balanced with the structure on the right. I could have done a vertical without any structure on the right, but that then wouldn't give the balance to the image. Photographed this on my Southwest workshop with the petroglyph in the rock. And so when I look at the histogram, it has detail everywhere. Now it's just a matter of how do I present it? How do I want to show the main element within this image? So some saturation, special lighting. And that now comes up just as you see it here. You immediately look at those petroglyphs. There isn't a doubt of what I want you to see. The large structure against the trees coming in from the left. Problem is that takes you right out of the image on the right-hand side. So now I flip this, you come in, this is Providence Canyon, south of Atlanta. When you come in from the left, you now look at it and I bring some saturation into it to really give an impact in the image. Stage two, and that on the right-hand side is that containment. So your eye comes in from the right, that pushes you back in and you have an area to the left of that structure with some trees in the detail in the area, detail in the shadows. Very important. One of the things I learned a long time ago, actually in my stage two, by reading a lot of Ansel Adams books, of that the shadow should have detail where the mind thinks it should see something. So you look at something and think, oh yeah, no, that's black, that's fine. And the highlights should have detail. So the brightest area is in the center. And when you look at this image, that's the first place you look. Photographed this model at Berry College. And the structure, I knew that I would flip the image and straighten the structure. So I'm concentrating on the highlights on her face, the detail of her dress, her hand, and do the exposure based on that. So that when I flip it, I have good detail in her hair, on her blouse, in her face, especially in the brightest area is her face. Now, you need to crop and straighten a bit, give you this composition so that you have no doubt of what I want you to see as the image. You notice how there's way too much happening on the left side of this image. So in stage two, learn to do some cropping and keying in on the main portion of the image you want to present. And I straightened that piece of architecture and darkened it a bit so that Her arm is lightened a bit and leads you right up to her face, right there. This is shot in Italy, and an evening shot. And one of the things I talked about just a little few minutes ago was having detail in the shadow areas. So when I was looking at the image and did the composition and looked at the histogram, I could see that if I had the exposure I had set up with the depth of field from sharpness to all the way back into the little town back there, I have detail in all areas of the image. Now, just present a little bit more saturation, and it just depends on whether you like saturation or don't. But rule of thirds, it's there. You get the sense of when you're looking at a scene, you don't always just think rule of thirds, but as you study it more and more, when you're looking at it at a scene through your camera, or you're just standing looking at the scene, you get a sense of the structure and the composition. So it's much stronger composition. Yosemite, looking at this more and more. And so I'm standing there and I realized it really does have rule of thirds related to it. But the important part was to bring out some of the details in the shadows. And here's a place to stand. If I don't give you a place to stand, then you are looking at the image. You notice you don't have a place to be there. You're just looking at it. If I give you a place to stand, you can feel part of it. So the emotional reaction you have is much different. Here's the original shot, looked at the histogram, knew I had great detail in the sky, had detail in all the shadow areas. And so I can bring this in, create a little more contrast, still keep detail in the shadow areas and emphasize that sky. And so many times somebody say, oh, you put that in there. No, I saw the lines, I saw the leading lines coming in, and I knew that as I captured all of this in this way, that I could dodge, burn, and create the three-dimensionality. And I mean three-dimensionality by the highlights in the foreground against darker areas, and then the leading lines and the sky being more contrast, which creates 3 dimensions. Up in northern Italy, and this was the shot right out of the camera, but I could see the special light in the sky. Just wanted to be sure that I had everything so I could increase the saturation, do some dodge and burn in a vignette. And so I looked at the histogram, everything was there for this shot, so I could provide this presentation and do a little dodging in that foreground so that when the image comes in, as it just did, you are looking where I want you to look. And they're detailed down in the shadow areas and the trees and the bushes. The other thing you start to learn in stage 2 is, geez, when you point your camera upward, things sort of tend to lean inward. This was shot in Florence, in Italy, and doing a vertical, but I'm getting down low to minimize the foreground. So the building is tilting. So you learn that if the lens is parallel with what you're shooting, then all the lines are straight. If not, when you point your camera upward, it causes the upward portion of what you captured to tilt in. If you pushed it downward, then the lower portion of your image would be pushed in. So here's the image. I needed to learn in stage 2 how to straighten it so that I could, and I did. In Photoshop, it's very easy to straighten it. And as I straightened it, I just increased the height a little bit to emphasize that structure as I saw it when I was standing there. Pointing up into a church, and knew that I would need to straighten it. So I'm allowing myself to have a little bit more in the image, because as I straighten it, I will lose some of the detail in certain areas. So here's the shot looking up into the church. And now I'm learning how to straighten these and present it this way. And so if you look back, you see that on the right side and on the left side, a little bit more there than what you see here, because when I straighten it, I lose some of that detail. So then I learned to allow more in my composition as I'm photographing. In Venice, getting down low so that I minimize the foreground, very low horizon line really at the base of the buildings. And so the building was tilting, and that's fine. But I knew from the histogram, I had great detail in the sky, all in the highlight areas and everywhere, so that I could bring out all the detail and present the image the way I was seeing it, and highlight the building down in the far back of the image. And this is how I present it. It's okay. I mean, sometimes this is down in Atlanta. I don't straighten anything. It's what I wanted to present so that you feel the height of this building. And the same with this. Yes, that's part of the whole aspect of it, the leading lines and leading up into the clouds, and those clouds creating leading lines. So yes, sometimes you do not straighten them because that's the emphasis of the structure of the image. Panoramas. Now in stage 2, started to learn panoramas. And you say, why? Why do I need to do that? Well, you want to show the scene as your mind sees it. Here's what I mean by that. This is in Costa Rica. And here, if I'm standing just looking straight out at the volcano and do a single shot, that's the volcano. But as I'm standing there, I'm looking around, and what I see is how that volcano fits into the whole scenery in front of me. So now I can capture that really well. Certainly, you could do it with a wide angle lens. I only have one lens. And in fact, I'd rather do a panorama because each shot gives me 30 megapixels. So a 3-shot at 90 megs, and I can make a really high quality print from that. So in Italy, this little home was so beautiful with those trees leading up to it. Beautiful sky at the time. So but I wanted to show the entire image of all those trees leading up. So I did it as a panorama. And in Yosemite, in order to capture Half Dome, not Half Dome, El Capitan and the 3 brothers on the right, and to have everything there. And the presentation here doesn't show detail of the highlight on El Capitan, but it's in the original. So how do I show this if I don't have a wide angle lens? And why do I want to do that anyway? I'd rather capture the panorama. So I had 1, 2, 3, 4, 5 shots. I'm hand holding, and you want to overlap by a minimum of 30% on each shot that you make. Well, you can see I overlapped a lot more of 30% on some of these images. That's fine. Photoshop or Lightroom just puts it together for you wonderfully. And you then have lots of pixels if you want to make a quality print. And in Scotland, I do a workshop in Scotland. And this is a very famous castle, almost a landmark now, Ilian Donan Castle in Scotland. But the single image just doesn't do this justice. So 3-shot panorama, and you can see I did overlap by more than a third. And then here's the final presentation, which really shows that castle, rather than going back to just a single image or a wide angle shot, which may not capture all that I want, just with a single lens. And in St. Peter's, panoramas, what a difference to show that. This does not show St. Peter's Square the way that does. That really puts it into perspective. Berry College, if you've been out there, panorama, great. Now you can do panoramas vertically as well as horizontally. So I was photographing in Mesa Verde, where I take the workshop out in the Midwest, out in the Southwest. And so I just overlap, was hand holding. And so overlap 1 shot, 3 shots, and then put them all together, 1, and here's how they were lined up based on how I was hand holding, and take it in, put them all together, do a little bit of color enhancement, and that's the final presentation. So I learned to do that very well, even vertically, to present El Capitan. Stage 3 now. High quality captures. Instant impact. Instant impact. When the image is viewed, whether it's in a competition, jurying, and think about that. You want your image to get in and get an award in a competition, it needs to have impact so that when the judge is looking at your image in relation to another couple hundred, that it sticks in their mind. Very strong composition, instant control of the viewer's eye, specific use of highlights, dark areas, balance of objects. Try to tell a story. Look at the look on the frog's face. He's looking pleased, eliciting emotion. Those are the key elements of stage 3. Look at me. You can't stop to look at that. Of course, it's a composite, just joking. But here's instant impact. Let's look at that and how it can work in various ways and how you can present it as instant impact. So I'm in Atlanta Zoo and I'm thinking of instant impact. And the mother orangutan with the baby, and a zookeeper came along and he said, I got to tell you something, that is not her baby. The parents for that baby died. And so the female orangutans adopt babies. So she adopted that baby and she will keep that baby until it reaches the age of 14. So I'm thinking, wow, okay. And I'm already now thinking about the background. I can blur that, darken it a little bit, bring out some highlights. And so I'm standing there and I'm concentrating on the composition and of course watching, and she does this. Oh, yes, that's the capture. That elicits emotion. And I darken that background, blur it, so that your eye goes immediately to the highlights and immediately to the sharpest area of the image. Right there. Mesa Verde, unique structure, dates from about 1200, 1200s, or maybe even before that. A whole community built in the side of a mountain, just spectacular. So I wanted to be sure to present this properly. I had a great sky there. And so I needed to look at the histogram to see that I had everything in the shadow areas. Remember, if you look into a shadow area and you expect to see detail, it should be detail there. So this is how I present this. I want you to see that structure. So it is the brightest area and the detail in the upper portion of the rock and all the foreground. You notice down at the bottom a little bit, I've darkened that, a little ridge down there to push your eye into the image itself. This is not mine. I captured this off the internet because I thought it was such a striking image in relation to the highlights. There was one aspect of this, and that's that white cloud up in the right corner. I can't stop looking up there. And here you have this beautiful image and then that white area up in the corner. Well, this one really is a difference, really tells a story. The viewer eye right to that highlight, and the mushroom cap is brighter than the waterfall behind it, and the bright area is right down at the bottom of the waterfall and the mushroom. You can't stop looking at it. This was one of my favorite areas up there. This is not my image, but in northern Italy and the Dolomite Mountains, just special. But instant impact tells a story. The highlight of that little chapel and that chapel against the background. For me, I would like to see some detail in those shadow areas, the trees. So here's my shot from up in that area, up in the Dolomites in northern Italy. And I have detail in the highlights and the wagon and the detail of the mountains, and even could have a little darker area of the sky above the mountain so that the bottom portion of the image is a brighter area. And I darkened just along the edge of the bottom so that you would put your eye more into where the carriage is coming down. Then darken the sky a little bit and highlight. So let's look at that. Sky's a little too bright. Darken it, push your eye back down, brighten the center area. So that becomes the major portion of the image. This is also my image from the Dolomites. And I was having lunch and I looked over and the light was changing. And there's that little church way down there in the far right area there. But I wanted to capture everything. Again, look at the histogram, good detail in the shadows, good detail in the highlights, just beautiful. Well, a friend of mine, her name is Kelly Dobson. She lives in Michigan. I thought, this is a great place. She is just superb. She's a member of Professional Photographers in America and has achieved master's level. And I first met her when I was living in Chicago, and I did a workshop in that area. And she came and she said, I have this camera. It's my dad's. It's called a medium format. I really don't know how to do much with this. Well, she's come a long way. Look at this image now. The reason I'm presenting it is, where does your eye go? Right to the baby, instantly to the baby. Good detail in the highlights on the baby. Good expression, elicits an emotion, all the aspects about this image. You can't stop looking where the highlight is. How about the reverse type of thing, where everything in the image is light? Now you look at the darkest portion of the image. Cute little guy. So now we get to stage 4. Stage 4, really advanced enhancements. You've learned a lot about how do you do things in Photoshop. You have simple image and or complex composites to be put together very artistically. You have a main background image, additional images on separate layers to create the artistic reality, artistic composite. And I call it artistic reality because it really is representing a scene made from real shots, but you're putting them together in a very artistic way. And you're blending modes per layer to bring things out. It's reality and sometimes abstract, both. And you use additional software packages. I now use Topaz Labs, Luminar AI, which is fantastic, Photoshop, Nik software. So artistic reality, artistic composites. Let's talk about that. I came up with the line, a photograph of the real world presented artistically. That's artistic reality. It's a photograph of the real world. Well, okay, let me take that a little bit more. How about just saying the real world presented artistically? Well, it's art. A painting is the real world presented artistically, a drawing, a sculpture. So we are reaching a whole new level with photography, that it's art, it's artistic reality. I was joking with this one, shot this guy down in the Atlanta Zoo, and I thought, what is he doing? Of course, he didn't have his cell phone in his hand. I put it there because everywhere I go now, I see people with their cell phones, and they are just drilling in on their cell phone. Oh yeah, I'll do that. Artistic reality, enhancements in the darkroom. Well, you think, oh, no, this is all new. No, it is not. Imogen Cunningham, in 1940, she was part of the F-64 group, which was started by Ansel Adams. Some very famous photographers in that group. This is a composite. Composites were created long before we even thought about that. So very artistic composite. Jerry Olsman, I really was taken with his work, and he produced these in the 1950s, and he's still producing them today. And I got in touch with him. I was living in Chicago at the time. And so I asked him if he would come up to Chicago and give a presentation to everyone. And he said, oh, sure, I'd be glad to do that. And of course, there was a fee and it paid for his expenses. He lives in Florida. So I brought him in and I had dinner with him the night before his presentation. And I talked about how he came up with the ideas and what he said. Well, of course, he's working in the darkroom. These are not digital images at the time. He does digital now, but these are darkroom. He said I would have multiple photographs, multiple negatives, and I'd have 5 enlargers in my darkroom, 5 enlargers and a negative in each enlarger. And then when I expose some portion of that first negative, I have to block out the rest of the paper because I move that paper from that enlarger to another enlarger. And then whatever I have negative I have in there, I have to block out what I just put down there. And I said, well, sometimes how long would it take you to make a final print? He says sometimes 3 to 4 days, because the first time I work through it, it's not the way I want it, and I have to do it again. And so each of those processes. So think about doing that kind of work and how easy it is today with digital. It's amazing difference. Ansel Adams, did he do artistic reality? Absolutely. He did major enhancements in the darkroom. Here's one of his famous ones from 1953, the Golden Gate Bridge. And this is what would be considered a straight print of the negative. He was shooting 8x10 negatives. And so here's his final presentation. Well, that's artistic reality. That's changing things. That's dodging, burning, changing the look of everything and doing it as a black and white. So Ansel was doing that. Of course he was. And his most famous image, 1941, Moonrise over Hernandez. This is how it has sold. In fact, a couple of years ago, it sold for $750,000. One of them, a 16x20, $750,000. But interesting is, I saw this at the museum in San Francisco when there was a display of his work, and I saw the one in the upper left. That's how he printed it at first. In 1941, he printed that image that way. Didn't become very popular. He then started to darken the sky to bring out the moon and the clouds in the background in 1943. So 2 years later, he changed how he was printing it. It wasn't until 1962 that he made the sky really dark, black, and emphasized the bottom portion. At that time, he realized that the bottom portion didn't have enough contrast, and he couldn't change that in the dark room directly by making a print. So he took the negative, dipped the bottom portion of the 8x10 negative into selenium toner, just the bottom portion, and then made a print so that he has more contrast of the church and the little village in the bottom portion. So talk about artistic reality. I shot this out in the Southwest, and I'm standing there already thinking, got to change that sky, got to change a little bit of the color saturation in various areas, darken some area. I'm thinking through the final image as I'm looking and making shots. So I'm shooting fewer images of a scene, but I'll do a couple because they may have a different perspective and want to be sure that that rock in the right-hand side isn't overlapping with the one in the background. So here's how I present the image, by putting in a different sky, highlighting the areas down where the walkers are coming up, actually remove the fellow who was sitting up in the open area. And now your eyes go to where I want you to see the foreground and working up. Now, when I put the sky in on this image, I had to learn a technique of how to do that. Well, amazing is today, Photoshop has replaced sky, and you can have your own cloud formations, and it just puts them in. It finds the sky. In fact, there's a feature called Select Sky, and then you can do things to it. It's just wonderful. But I did it by working with the digital image and then putting the sky in, making selections and doing that kind of thing. And on this one, I used Photoshop, photographing And you say, what are you talking about, Joan? There's no sky. Yes, well, the next one I'll show you. Photographed the osprey coming in to feed the babies in the nest. So I allowed some extra room so that if I needed to crop or do whatever, and wanted to be sure I had good detail in the face and sharpness from the tip of the wing on the front one wing to the other. So many people shooting at a very wide open aperture. And then because they wanted a very fast shutter speed, because you need a fast shutter speed in order to freeze the action, doesn't create a good final image. So I was shooting at f8 or f11 and had the ISO up high enough that I could capture this at a very fast shutter speed. I think it was 1/1000th of a second, and then put a sky in. Emphasize all that's happening. Crop off the bottom of the nest and clone in some additional areas there with twigs so that you don't see the structure of that underneath it, and allow the highlight to be on the mother or the father. I'm sure what that, maybe it's the mother coming in. Shot this on a workshop up in Georgia here, and thought, oh yeah, that'll be neat. I could do something with this. Even though the wing in the upper portion is out of focus, okay, I'll work with that. The eye is very sharp. I just need to change that background and emphasize this presented in an entirely different way so that the bird is coming down to land on something. Shoot photographing, remember, artistic reality, stage 4. I'm thinking through multiple images. Here is the bike race in Roswell. I'm thinking, okay, I want those riders as they're coming straight in. That is the most important part of this shot. Catching them as they're coming around the bend. Boy, I'd like that white arrow on the ground. So that's really neat. And the stop sign, but all that stuff in the background, that'll have to go. And if I can put these two into a composition to emphasize this, so crop in on that, change the background, keep the white arrow, put the two together, blur the background of the one on the left and put motion into it, use the motion blur filter and a little bit on the one on the right, and combine the two into an image that artistic reality. This is out in Possum Trot School in Berry College area. And I just think it's such a neat old building. Used to be a school at one time, actually a church, and then a school. And I wanted it just to be such a neat place. So I did a panorama. And it was an idea of just changing this. And in my volume 4, my Fine Art Techniques volume 4, this is one of the exercises in there, and you change it from spring to autumn. So here's the spring shot, and here's how to change it to autumn. So I wanted to have a whole different presentation. So what's wrong with this? Oh, that road coming in from the middle center and leading to the left, that's not good. So if I flip this horizontally, now that road takes you in so that you see the structures, and the fence now leads into those structures. See here, the fence is actually leading you off the right-hand side. There's nothing here to indicate one way or the other. So I can make that and change this into an autumn scene and bring out the detail in the clouds. Mesa Verde, great light, good highlights, good detail. How about doing a composite and putting in a Native American working into the scene? Here, interesting, up in Caves Cove. How about if I put in the elk that was shot just down the road a little bit and create an artistic reality? Shot this in a park near here. Oh, wow, captured him really well now. All that background is distracting, and it doesn't give you the idea of his movement. So if I change the background and create motion, put him up in the sky, create the motion from his feet downward, you have a whole different presentation of and how you look at that image. So it's artistic reality. These two photographed the hummingbird, the flower, the curve of the flower was so beautiful. And I thought, oh yes, I just need to put these together in the right way to create a composition that your eye will come in from the left, roam around, and then come back down to the hummingbird. Enhance the colors, sharpen the areas that need to be sharpened, darken the background to make it three-dimensional. Talk about three-dimensionality. Three-dimensionality for me is, how do you make something stand out? Well, a light against dark has it stand out. The light flower against the dark background has it stand out. And the hummingbird, even though it's not quite dark behind there, but it is where the wings are, so that they become much more three-dimensional. Sometimes just playing with an image, this is a bridge shot in San Francisco area, and just playing with it to use one of the filters available in Photoshop, just change the look out of it so that it's not reality anymore. It's artistic. This could be a painting as well as just a shot. Photographing in the zoo, these two, and what struck me was the male looking at me so angrily. And I thought, okay, all I want to do is capture enough of this and I can present this in a number of ways because I have good depth of field, have shadow details, highlight details. So I'll put a different background in there as though they're sitting out in the wild. Ah, how about if I put a sky in so they're sitting up high, a whole different presentation. In stage 4, you start to think about how you want to show your image, not just what you've captured or enhanced or changed the highlights and the shadows. Shot this in Costa Rica and could not get that sloth to be in a location where the background would look like this, but I thought, okay, no problem. I know how to handle backgrounds. I just need to get another image of some interesting background and then put the two together, do a little dark burning. This is the main area of the image. Lighten up the face so there will be detail in it and present it with a whole different background. So that's the final presentation. Same with this one, shot it in an area down in Costa Rica, and I'm shooting through glass, but he's looking out to the right. So when you come in, you look out, and the background, of course, that doesn't work well. So I'll change the background, highlight the face. So the brightest area is where I want your eye to go, and reverse it so that as you come in, you're looking right into him rather than here. It actually works both ways, but he's taking you out the right-hand side, where this way you come in and you stay, and his body brings you back down around and then up again on the left-hand side. This is an artistic reality. It's a composite that I shot multiple images in Costa Rica. Here's the flower shot. Here's the bird shot. Blocked out portions of that image, put the two together, darken the background, the light against dark. See that bird, how it stands out three-dimensionally against that dark area? Play with things, play with the images. This was shot in Italy. But the thing is you see this image, you think, oh yeah, you're coming down the steps, and you go around and look at that area. That's not as interesting as if I flip it, then you feel, see, elicited emotion, you feel that you're going up the steps and then looking through the window down. And as I did that, I thought, wouldn't it be interesting to simply combine the two? And it almost creates a face and a whole different structure. And if I put eyes in it, I can create what I want and how I want to present it. I'm not just presenting architecture, I'm presenting a piece of art. Same with this. This is a church in Scotland. Wonderful architecture. And I wanted to emphasize that even more. So I duplicated that layer, flipped it, and then put the two together. That's a striking piece of architecture. So when you're in what I call stage 4, You are creating. This is not just a matter of capturing. You're creating. In this church in Italy, I came in and I realized that my first exposure had to be for the detail in the shadow areas, and that there'd be blown out highlights in the windows, and then do another exposure. So you look at that histogram, and then you do the number of exposures so that you can put them all together. Well, after I did that, I also needed to put a light ray in the image so that it was coming in from that upper window. And you see the detail of the window in the back and things like that. Well, light rays, by the way, as I was putting them in, I was creating them. Today, Luminar, you just go to one of their features and they're light rays. It puts them in. It's amazing, amazing. I put these in on these images by hand. I created a light ray, a light structure, and then added it into the image to emphasize it. So many times I've been in Florence and want to capture in the bridge, but the sky is nothing. Well, nowadays, but when I shot this, the Ponte Vecchio in Florence, when I shot this, there were no such features as replace sky. So I knew that I could replace the sky. I can make a selection of the sky and then inverse it and put it in the water. So I did that. And here's the presentation of this. So I wanted to capture that with all the detail of where I needed and remove the cars, come back, but I've flown out those cars on the lower right area, open up some of the other areas of on the left-hand side and put the reflection of the clouds. Now, there's a feature in Luminar. Yes, it's in Luminar that if you put a sky in and you have water, it automatically puts the reflection in the water. I see that coming in Photoshop also. So up in the on the workshop in the Smoky Mountains, and the waterfalls are so pretty. That's wonderful. And I can increase the saturation and make it turn it from spring into autumn, but it's just a scene. It's not interesting enough. But if I create the interest, I had photographed that elk a little bit down the road. Actually, I photographed it west or east of the Smoky Mountains, Cataloochee Valley in September. The elk rut takes place from about mid-September into October, and you can get some great shots of the elks and their females. So I had that shot and put that in. Now I'm starting to tell a story. And I thought better would be to have another male elk saying, "What are you doing in my territory?" Create a story. Also up in Cades Cove area. Turn it into autumn. Put in a worker, a farmer, and way back in the entrance of the barn, I put a deer. The structure is important. That large limb in the top is a containment to push you down into the image. So here's the fellow that I photographed actually up the road from where I shot this, and I knew I would use him. I could select him and put him in, and then the deer in the barn. Final image. Same with this one. Look at this. Remember I said we read left to right? Well, this doesn't work very well in that sense, because as you're coming in, you roll off the bottom right corner. If I flip that, that works better. You come in from the left and you look up through, and those trees, those large trees, become a containment to push you back into the left side of the image. But that bright white area down in the lower right, that needs to go. So I cloned various pieces, put that in there, turned it into an autumn scene. So the entire difference from there to there. Good detail in the water throughout. Detail in the shadows. Tell a story. I put an elk looking at you from that right-hand side. That has much more interest than just this image this way. So artistic reality, make it art. Photographed this in Venice. I thought I will use this someday. So I put that together with some sheet music. Vivaldi lived and wrote his music in Venice. I shot this in Venice and thought it's a tribute to Vivaldi. So that's my artistic representation using that mask. Another mask in another window that I want to show that artistically. So I present it this way. Going up to the top of the tower in Florence, looking out the window, and I think, I can't see the Duomo very well, but that window is such a beautiful structure. So if I photograph the Duomo from the window, then take half of that window, duplicate it, put it together. Remember, I'm creating just an artistic piece of how I want the presentation, and then put that shot of the Duomo in the window, so that that would be how I would think that you could see it if it didn't have all that other stuff around. I'll go through this a little bit faster. Have this shot of the desert area. I wanted to create an artistic, so have a horse, photograph the saddle, photograph that fellow, and created what I called a story, tell a story of him walking his horse into that, and darkened the foreground, highlighted the middle ground, darkened the upper portion of the image, and created the saturation. Same with this one. Rider coming down the field. He actually came down through there a little later when I was standing waiting for the elks. This is in Catalucci. And so there was an elk a little farther down also. So I created the final presentation based on the multiple shots. This little lady that I photographed up in Chicago, created a little half of that, put the two together. This is shot in Roswell area. And then want to remove that door, I'll put clouds in there, and I'll take her from the shot I did on a negative, and put the two together, and then put the clouds and a little bit of a portion of her going in, and I called it Heavenscape. And I created a different one from a shot and a model I had photographed and put some wings on, and called it Two Worlds. I'm creating art. And you think, oh, well, that's just you. Oh, really? Here's photographic Professional Photographers of America, 2019. I went to their annual, and here is a final image, and on the right you see all of the multiple photographs that they used to put together the final image. This one is even more complex. Look at the bottom and how they would have to change the light, the structure, all those things you see over on the left-hand side, the dog there. Look down in the bottom right, see that dog, the window. Oh, wow, what amount of work to put that together. Here are the ones up top that were shot to do a final presentation. This was presented and won an award in Professional Photographers of America annual convention. Came across this woman, and I had her come and do a presentation at the Booth Photography Guild of her work. These are composites, of course, but so beautiful and so striking. And here's Kelly Dobson. Remember the little baby that I showed you earlier? Well, Kelly does some other kinds of things also, and this was really an interesting, the three bears. Yeah, you got it. Dominique Chapineau is a woman here in Atlanta area. She creates these images from multiple, every little piece in this image is a separate layer. I went to her place to see how she does this, and a final image like this will be 150 different layers. Worldwide, Adrian Sommerling creating these kinds of images. He's in the Netherlands. I photographed this with my cell phone in a lobby in California because my son and I also like Star Wars so much. And so I copied it, duplicated it, and a friend of mine has a little son and he wanted it. So I created a poster for him. Starfighter Pilot Jaren is his name. May the force be with you. I created it from that shot I did with my cell phone. Also created that one and then put it together into an image. So stage one, basic, simple. You start to learn to use your camera. You learn aperture, depth of field, shutter speeds, all those things, a little bit about rule of thirds maybe, but compositions and things, leading lines. Stage two, get to where the quality captures. Now you're doing much more of capturing things, and really you're capturing fewer images because you don't just shoot, you're shooting when you know something is the way you want it to be. Stage three, instant impact. Where are the highlights, the shadows? And then stage four, what I'm calling artistic reality. Yeah, you can do it. Don't worry about it. You can do it. No doubt. Just let yourself go free and you'll be able to do it. Just a little brief advertisement. I have a number of fine art books, one on volume 8, which goes through all the kinds of things I talked about, taking something from spring to autumn, what I call stretching, scrunching, those kinds of things, changing it like that. It's in that volume. And I have a couple other books. So that's it for tonight, guys. I hope I did not take up too much of your time.